go green on your microphones, everybody. It's 4 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the August 21st, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of Public Works. And we could start with the invocation.
I'd like to take a moment just for everybody to take a moment to pray to your own God for guidance in the success of this meeting. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Will. And pledge allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Looks like what we need to do right now is to swear in our newest member, Kelly Cookson.
So raise your right hand and repeat after me. I take the oath that I possess
I take the oath that I possess
all the qualifications for the office of which I am chosen.
all the qualifications for which the office I am chosen.
I am not subject to any of the disqualifications
And am not subject to any of the disqualifications
set forth in the charter for the office or employment I am about to assume.
set forth in the charter for the office or employment I am about to assume.
That I will support the Constitution and the charter
That I will support the Constitution and the charter
and the ordinances of the city of Hannibal.
and the ordinances of the city of Hannibal.
And that I will faithfully discharge
And that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of this office.
the duties of this office.
That in appointment,
That in appointment,
promotion, or discharge of the officers or employees,
promotion, or discharge of the officers or employees,
I will be influenced only by the consideration of fitness,
I will be influenced only by the consideration of fitness,
and that in such matters
and that in such matters
I will act impartially in justice.
I will act impartially and justice.
Congratulations.
Good job. Okay, now you can vote. I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. And we're at this point moving the agenda around a little bit to have Mr. Kyle Haming move up. He's got a scheduling conflict and would like to go early, and if there's any disagreement, let me know.
Can everyone hear me? This is Kyle here.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thanks very much for you guys' times. I appreciate this. I'm based in Minneapolis, but I'm calling you, which is on the northern side of the Mississippi River here. But I'm calling you from Duluth, Minnesota, where I've got a Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association conference. Anyway, I'm here to talk with you today about an update to the hedging policy, basically. So you guys will recall back in January of last year, there were some discussions about a unified energy and capacity hedging policy for the power supply procurements. You'll recall also as well, too, that in July of last year, you approved a policy that essentially enabled all the components of that. You can see a lot of that really here on the screen. We broke this down, essentially, the needs into a set of buckets. Most of the energy ones, I think, here are fairly straightforward and sort of are self-explanatory. All that we're focusing on here today and what today's update is fundamentally about is just the capacity part of this. So basically what's happened since July of 2022, which is why we're requesting this update, has basically been that the MISO capacity market has been, it's been a bit of a ride, I think is the diplomatic way of putting it. Between when we originally had some of these discussions back in January of last year and when the policy was approved in July, MISO capacity prices absolutely blew out. They went to the maximum possible price that was available there. Obviously, it was a significant hit as part of that. So for the planning year, which the auction ended up taking place in late April, early May of this year. We obviously worked hard to attempt to find some contracts to lower the degree of exposure that we'd have. Now, the trouble was that basically there were a great deal of rule changes by MISO during this period. They completely switched from a construct, for example, in which all capacity was essentially broken down into units of lasting 1 year long, down to ones that were actually 1 season long, right? So that for each particular planning year, you would have to get separate summer, fall, winter, and then also spring units as well too. This, in addition to situations of being offers being rather scarce, just made it extremely difficult in order to be able to come up with anything. And I think what we found was that basically when we were able to find offers, which was often rare, most counterparties straight up weren't selling, that things were a bit more expensive than what we wanted. And I think what we found was that, our original plan had it so that we would be going out and procuring up to 35 megawatts of capacity, which is the majority of Hannibal's needs, all in one big go. And what we found instead, and what we're basically proposing today with this policy update, is to give ourselves a new approach. And the fundamental core of this new approach is going to be diversification and layering, which are sort of, I guess, what you might call somewhat fancy terms for really saying we're going to set up a series of overlapping contracts. And each one of these is going to be smaller than that 35 megawatt, ballpark need of what we were talking about. We're going to basically break things down into 3 buckets. One of them is going to be sort of longer term purchases. Again, you're talking about 10 megawatts or so of that, have it be 5+ years. Second one will be in another purchase that will be in the 1 to 3 year range, also about a similar sort of size. And the key is that for both of these pieces, they're not going to be concluding at the same time. Okay. The big sort of notion upon all of this and the fundamental promise and the big sort of takeaway I want you to have when looking past all of this, looking past any sort of complications, is this is intended to put it so that Hannibal is never in a position at any point in time of having to go out for more than about 20 megawatts or so in any one particular year. Okay. And then the final sort of piece of this, I said that there were 3 pieces, is what we would call balancing. Basically, what this would mean is that anything that's not covered under the contracts that we'll have going forward out of this will be looked at in early January. We'll test the market, see what's available, see if there's going to be any cause of concern. If it looks like it's going to be expensive, we can go ahead and hedge that. If it isn't, then we can leave it to market, and that will offer us the diversification benefits. So what this hedging policy is just intended to enable will essentially be, first step will essentially be an RFP for next month, looking after the 1 to 3 year sort of purchase. It will also enable as well to us going out and developing some enabling agreements. And after we found the best price for a longer term piece of this, we can go out and we can execute on it. And then finally, whatever remains each January, we'll check for the market, see how things look. And then if we've got to hedge it, we can. If not, we can leave it to the market. And knowing that in any case, we're never going to have to, being that the stakes are so much lower and we're having to buy a lot less, that ultimately, if the worst case scenario happens, it's not going to be too bad of a financial hit. So the fundamental promises, like I said, is just we're having lower stakes. It's going to be easy for peers to join on this, given that we're going to be talking about more standardized sorts of products. It's going to be easy to repeat and easier to vet. So that's my presentation. Questions, discussions?
Yes, I've got one, Kyle. What's the worst case scenario for us to kind of watch out for? as we look in January to make our purchases?
That's a very good question. So the MISO capacity auction takes place it's supposed to happen in April, but this year it happened in May because of some rule delays. The worst case scenario here is that it hits the maximum price which is allowed by the auction. This maximum price is something that's called CONE, which stands for cost of new entry. Essentially, it would be the price of if you had to plunk down a brand new natural gas-fired combustion turbine. This was actually the price that things hit back in April of 2022. So that price ended up being $237 per megawatt day, as I recall. By the way, this is a maximum sort of price that's actually set by MISO well in advance of the auction, is actually approved by FERC. So what we'd be looking for to avoid is essentially hitting that particular price again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody have questions? Anything we should be questioning?
I will tell you, there's a lot of things in flux, and I'll talk about this just a little bit in my report. But this is a way that we can manage what I was on a call just recently talking about the MISO capacity auction and what those numbers are looking like. And they're looking at right now this year, we had some old generation that didn't get mothballed, that didn't get taken offline, and that's the only thing that brought us from having our generation, which is less than the demand. They brought that up just a little bit, but they're predicting and showing over the next 5 years that it's going to go down to a -1, 4, and down to 9% shortage in power generation.
For MISO.
For MISO, as we're going forward. With that, that's going to be a pressure to take that capacity cost that we're looking at hedging here and driving it through the ceiling. So again, our electric rates that we pay for, we have 3 items. Number 1 is the actual electrons. Number 2 is transportation. We have to get transmission. We have to get that power from the generators to here, and we pay for all of those power lines. We pay our proportion as we touch that. The third bucket is this capacity, and this is what in the past we've always had more generation than we've had demand, and because of the nation's move against coal, the nation's move towards renewables, it has just driven that down, changed it, and it's gone from a couple years ago being $5, $7 per megawatt per day to $236 per day and the new CONE, cost of new entry, that's anticipated also to be driven up. So instead of having a limit of $236 or $300, it may even go $500 to $1,000, which would take our electric costs, and it would cost us huge amount. So this is a way of writing out a policy of what we're going to do as we hedge going forward. The other thing that's happened is it's gone from an annual auction to now it's seasonal. And so we've got to look at it spring, winter, fall, all the seasons. And we've got to have something in place for each one of those.
So we don't anticipate, I was looking at the numbers on Kyle's chart, we don't anticipate the grain belt coming through or going online till 2037?
2028, what's the date on that you were looking at? That's the summer of?
I believe that is late 2027. Yeah.
20, and we're looking more like 2028. So the other thing that we're getting a pretty good chunk out of grain belt is wind power. It's a renewable, and you only get 18% credit per base plate. So while we're getting 20 megawatts from Prairie State, we get 20 megawatts of capacity. If we put 10 megawatts of wind on, we're only going to get 1.8%. And so you've still got to have a backup plan of a gas generator or an oil generator or a coal generator or a nuclear generator that has that capacity that we have signed on to and purchased from them. So all of this is pressures to bring up and increase our costs.
Yes, and grain belt is a very good price on all of it, and it's a very, very good energy resource. But in terms of the capacity credits it gives, it's much less.
Okay.
Is Greenville a done deal?
Define done deal. And I'm very,
You know what I'm
so,
asking?
so what you've got, so grain belt, when it first came on, they were talking 2023 or 4 that they were hoping that it would be on. You've got the state that has gone after them because they don't like the possibility of them using eminent domain. So they've had that put on them. The next step is that they have moved where they're going to have some of their substations, move that, and the state then said, okay, we also want more power. So they're having to change their route. I guess it's called the Tiger Line, that they're coming in, going south, going into Columbia. That's adding more time. And we watch very carefully every year that there's groups that still come in and fight against the transmission lines. And so right now, they're saying for construction, for approval through all of the permitting requirements, 2028 is, they're anticipating that it'll happen. Is it a done deal? Absolutely not.
Contractually, the contracts that we did years ago still stands firm for Hannibal, though, if it does come through.
Yes.
That we have still all of the benefits that, because we got in contractually early on.
Yes,
So this isn't an economy problem, this is a supply and demand problem.
correct.
Kyle, another question. We're a small utility compared to other communities. What are other communities doing? What's Ameren, for example, doing to address capacity? Are we missing something there is my question.
Oh, well, you are a small community, and this is part of the reason, actually, that for you have to think about this problem a little bit differently than somebody like Ameren. Ameren historically has been a large enough shop of where they can go out and build, large physical assets all by themselves, right? They just have to find the right site, plan it, get the financing, and put all of it down, right? Now, you guys being a 60 megawatt load, actually are in a position of where you have to think a little bit differently and think a little bit more creatively. So for you, I think certainly it makes a little bit more sense to instead think in terms of some capacity-only deals like the ones that we talked about here. Basically, what you would do with those is that you go to somebody who's a marketer or a broker or one of those things, and instead of going out for 300, 400 megawatts of an Ameren-sized unit, or even something like an 80 megawatt sized unit if you're trying to go for a combustion turbine, you would instead say to the marketer, hey, can we obtain a standardized capacity-only product of, say, 1 to 3 years here? Wherever they find that, as long as it meets the qualifications for what we're looking for as far as capacity accreditation, that's good enough for us. Just give us the capacity credits. Nothing else matters. So that's more what you're looking to do here.
Okay.
And we're also, Kyle helps us work closely with a couple of other utilities here in Missouri, and that helps us to increase our purchasing power a little bit, if that leverage, I guess, is the right word.
Exactly. We roll the procurement together with several of our other clients, and what this allows us to do is to increase the scale and to make it easier for you guys to get done at a reasonable price.
You sound like my stockbroker.
Not that different.
Darren?
Yes.
If your solar project flies and if the cogen project flies, is that even a dent in that?
It is. It's a little dent.
Okay.
And so what really does, so if you look at that, the Hannibal solar, you see just above the Prairie State, you've got the darker
Okay, yeah.
aqua in there.
Okay.
What it really doesn't bring any capacity itself, but what it does is it pulls our peak down, which then reduces the capacity. It's a function of that. So it's not a one-to-one, but it's if the stars align and the sun is shining when we're hitting those peak days of heat in the summertime, that will help pull it down. It won't be if we build 4 megawatts of power, we're going to get, a portion of that.
Would the cogen be 1-to-1?
Cogen would be 1-to-1. Yes, it would. So that would be a very positive thing for us on the capacity.
One other question came to mind as you were speaking. We receive benefits from our own coal manufacturer or supplier. If they increase their capacity, does that help us? In other words, their
would.
output. In other words, coal miners go to work faster and longer and more hours, that kind of thing. Does that help us?
It would, but that'll never happen, not in today's climate. In other words, we've got Prairie State that's declining. They want to take and get rid of coal. Coal is,
But you can mitigate that with scrubbers.
yes, yeah,
As a consideration.
yeah. There's some options out there, but, and again, you've got to have a plant that is able to turn on at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your solid capacity providers versus renewables, which sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and so you're at nature's whim, and you've got to rely on it.
Okay. Anybody else? I think we're done. Kyle, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.
Bye.
All right. Moving right along. Darren, could you hit us with the general manager?
Let's go with the general manager's report. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share a couple things about some of the regulations that are going on that we are trying to follow. And we talk about regulations, and unfortunately what happens is on almost every front that we are working in, our electric, our water, sewer, and stormwater, there's new regulations and pressures. And when it comes to the electric, I've never seen it move more quickly in my experience as a general manager. Let's go through a couple of these. Number one, water. There's a couple of federal laws. We have the Clean Drinking Water Act that happened several years ago. It is very good. America has the best water around. We keep people healthy. We have children that are safe. And yet there's a law that says they have to go through and look at the secondary contaminants and make sure that there's something in there that they can then begin to regulate. And they do this on a regular basis. The latest on the horizon is called PFOS, PFOS. And what that is actually a family of chemicals. There's actually 100 of them, or probably more. And what these chemicals are, they're what they call forever chemicals. They were created, a lot of them were for no-stick pans. What those chemicals do is they are actually repel water. They're very good at it. And the problem is that in nature, what helps break everything down, you have water, which is the ultimate solvent of all things. It doesn't break these down. So these chemicals, these PFOS, will stick around for a long time. The government has come in and said, all right, we're going to regulate this. And with that, they've done some studies. They've tried to go out and find where they're at. The other item that PFOS makes is foam, fire protection or firefighting foam that you use at airports and training facilities for fire departments. And they have found that a lot of that has leached into the ground, gotten into water sources. And so they've done a lot of testing for that. One of the difficult things about this chemical is that they started out a few years ago and they were actually looking at measuring it at 200 to 400 parts per trillion. Now, in comparison, if you take our water, we put chlorine into it, and we try and keep our water, we're supposed to keep it, I believe, from 0.3 to about 1.5 parts per million. And so one way of thinking about that is if you have a 55-gallon drum and you take one drop of chlorine and put that in there, that's right about 1 part per million. To go to billion, that's one drop per 1,000 55-gallon drums. To go to trillion, you've got to take that 1,000, multiply it by another 1,000 with one drop of that dispersed within it. So I still have a hard time even wrapping my mind around what's a part per trillion. And we're going to be measuring this chemical down to that 4 parts per trillion. The other thing that happens is you have to find a laboratory that can actually test it to that. And that's a difficult thing to do. The rule has not come out completely because they are looking at, of those 100 chemicals in the family, they're looking at 6 of them that they might include in this. So if you have all 6, you have to test for all 6 of the chemicals, and then you take and add that up, and if all 6 of them hit the 4 part per trillion, then you have to do some sort of treatment for it. Luckily, this is the good news, there's 2 ways of taking PFAS out of water. And one is ion exchange, and the second one is with carbon filtration. And with our GAC, we're pretty confident that anything that might be going in is being filtered out and is captured at that time. So we're waiting to see what that falls in. That was probably a year or so ago that they were holding it at 11 parts per trillion was the max. There's pressures. Do they want to go to 4, which is the limit of measure? We're waiting for them to give us those rules, and then we will follow those rules to the T. But there will be a cost to doing that.
Any comparison? You've got the ion exchange versus the carbon filter exchange treatment for that. Is there any studies or dollars on that at this point?
The
availability.
Ion exchange is just much more expensive. So we're going to be than the carbon filtration. I'm going to ask crew, Matt, do you know of any, is there any kind of
any broad
any
numbers
guess on what
that?
the additional cost is? You have to run.
The biggest thing comes to either regeneration of the carbon, what they can do with it, because now you're taking that PFAS out of the water. What do you do with that material that is
Can't
collected?
recycle that then, yeah.
There's some discussion about that, and then that would be the same with the waste stream from the ion exchange. You know, you pulled that PFAS out of the water. What do you do with it now?
You've got a hazardous material that
Correct.
contend with.
So we're watching that closely to see where it falls and when they might come up with a final rule. Next one, if we also go into water, we talk about the lead and copper rule. And that was one that a couple years ago, the federal government came out. There was problems with lead in Flint, Michigan. Most everybody's heard about that. And the government said, all right, we're going to take lead out of all of the water systems. And they came up with several $1 billion that they were going to give to everyone. And they wanted to take the lead out of the service lines, everything from any main line, any main connection, all the way to the home. And in fact, there were some people that wanted to go through the homes. The problem is that several $1 billion wasn't even a drop in the bucket for what it would cost, because such as ourselves here in Hannibal, we have the responsibility for the mains. The citizenry, if you own your home, you're responsible for the tap to your home. And it goes through our meters, etc. And so we don't have the right to go onto someone's private property, dig up their lines and replace those lines. If you do that, you have a liability that you're opening up yourself to. And we weren't the only ones that have that concern. In fact, the AWWA, the American Water Works Association, they have taken and brought in a case before the EPA to ask them what is the legal answer to this. So if you look, I'm not quoting this per se, but there's a lot of items here in my report that you have to do with the lead and copper rule. They have backed off on much of it, awaiting the outcome of the legal decision on who's responsible for that private property. We're going to have to do an inventory. So what we have to do is we've got to go find out exactly what's in the ground. We've already started this. We have a great step on it, jump on it, in that we have gone through all the records. We know that in 1986, there was a law that came out that you can no longer put solder or brass fittings that have lead in them can no longer be used. And so we know that any home that was built from 1986 to present do not, at least we have a pretty darn good guess, they do not have any lead in their service lines or even in their homes. But anything built before that is likely that it does. And so we've put that together. There may be some requirements to verify that, but again, we're watching as that moves forward. I would like to, here's a little caveat for everyone. There's two things that happen to make lead leach out of your line and come into your home, and that is the pH and the corrosivity of the water. We test those daily. At least we do the pH. I don't know if we do the corrosivity test. It's more like, it's not quite as often. It's weekly. And as we keep those numbers exactly where they're supposed to be, we pass the lead and copper sampling requirements. It is part of our consumer confidence report, which is available to every citizen. We tell everybody about it every year. We also put it on our website. It's called a CCR, or Consumer Confidence Report. You can look at that and it'll tell you exactly what's in our water and what's happening with our lead and copper rule testing that we're doing. But again, that's in motion and we're watching it. The next thing is, let's move to wastewater. Wastewater, again, as we're taking all of these standards and we're increasing them and making them more strict, we're doing the same with our wastewater. They have concerns that there's a eutrophication going on down in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's actually happening in a few places in America. And what that means is you've got a large portion of nitrates and phosphates that are being carried by our rivers and by our streams down to a certain point where it sits in that, and it takes and it consumes all the oxygen. And it builds algae, and it takes all the oxygen out, and it kills the fish. It kills everything in these eutrophied zones, end up being deserts and destroyed areas. So environmentally, there's a concern. And so what we do is we have a permit. It's called a NIPDES permit. It's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And if you put any of your effluent, anybody in America puts your effluent into a stream or another water body, you have to have this permit. And that is governed by your state and also by the EPA. In it, it states for us that we can only have X percent of nitrates and X percent of phosphates that we can take and put back into the Bear Creek. We are meeting all of those requirements. But now the government is saying we want to have an additional, possibly 75% to 80% reduction in those nutrients being put in. Now, they're not just saying so we've got really three options to do this. Number one, we can do what's called nutrient trade. We take and say, all right, we know that we're putting 3.5 million gallons of water a day through our plant and discharging it into Bear Creek. We know that ultimately it provides, let's say, 200 pounds of nitrogen and 20 pounds of phosphate. Well, that needs to be 100. That means we have 100 pounds that we've got to make up for. We've got a couple ways to do this. Number one, we can go buy farmland and allow that farmland to return to native forest, and we will get credits of X pounds of nitrogen and X pounds of phosphate per acre. If you can imagine, that might be a little expensive. And they give us credit for that. They're willing to give us credit for about 5 years. And then we have to go buy more farmland. And then we would have to buy more, and we'd have to buy more. That could be, pretty expensive. And we're looking at that. We're considering what that might be. The other thing that happens is you can buy it from another plant that has excess. So if our permit says we can put out 200 pounds, we only put out 100 pounds. That means I've got 100 pounds of nitrate that I can sell to another treatment facility. And the cost of that is purely negotiable. So just like our capacity market, how it's skyrocketed, those pounds of nitrogen could end up becoming fairly valuable.
Just like carbon credits.
Exactly like carbon credits. We're doing it now with potassium or phosphates and nitrates.
I wonder if we can use our right-of-way under our utility lines as a credit.
I don't know if we could or not. That's
Let's
a thought.
negotiate that.
And then finally, what we do is we may look at, if we are outside of that parameter, do we need to do something at our facility to increase its ability to remove nitrates and phosphates. It could be that we look seriously at doing something with microfiltration. We could put a 5-micron filter that would take and reduce our nitrate phosphate output, and we could then be that bank. We're the ones that are selling versus the one having to buy. This doesn't go into effect till 2030, so we have some time. We have also, I take my hat off to Tony Boone, who's our consultant down there, and he's done a lot of research and going before MDNR to make sure that our voice is heard and that we want to make sure these things are fair and are based on real science. So that's another regulation that I would tell you we need to look at in the future, but it's going to be a cost, one way or another. Whatever that method is that we decide to go after so that we can stay in compliance, it could be very expensive. MS4, we talk about stormwater. I think we've heard quite a bit about that. MS4 is a municipal separate storm sewer system. That's the S4. That's where that comes from. And the federal government and the state government, again, they're looking at taking and regulating stormwater. And there's kind of two items. Number one is the actual volume of stormwater. We've got to make sure it's going out, down in the right way. But the one that they're moving forward on more quickly is water quality. So as we have water coming off of parking lots and out of the streets where you've got oils and everything else that are coming through, you also have folks that have dogs that are taking, and we all like to fertilize our lawns. They find that those have much higher outputs of nitrates and phosphates than actually farmlands that are also regulated, and they usually have nutrient plans that they're using their fertilizer and doing with. And so we have larger amounts of nitrates coming off of municipal areas than you do off of agricultural areas. They're looking at managing that. We've got 6 things we have to do. We have to do public education and outreach. We have to do public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination. If we see someone that's actually doing something and getting rid of their oil or something down the drains, we've got to watch that and make sure it doesn't happen. Construction site runoff control, post-construction runoff control, and finally pollution prevention and good housekeeping. We're partnering with the city on these things. We're working at getting our stormwater funded so that we can do a better job on our part. We're still already doing a lot of the education and outreach. We're working with the city on some of the other controls, but we need that funding so we can move forward with that. And again, out in the utility world, they're starting to tighten up on it, and there's actually some fines and things that are being talked about throughout the nation in areas where it hasn't quite gotten up to speed. Lastly, electric, we've already gone over. Our capacity issues, MISO is changing the way things are done, that going from an annual construct to a seasonal construct. I'm not going to dig that up again, but again, those changes are going to simply be very expensive for us as we meet all those requirements and as the market changes. The last thing I will say, probably not, I won't lie. Our Stormwater Action Committee, we're going to have our next meeting on September 14th. It'll be starting at 5:30. We have come down to 3 final funding solutions. One is based on pervious surface, one is a flat fee based on meter sizes, electric meters, and a third one is based on your assessment from the county, actually what you are. Either it's an agricultural or a commercial or a residential, and it would be a flat rate. We would not take into consideration how large that parcel might be. It would be based, that tax would be based just on that, the nomenclature and the zoning definition of your parcel. Those are the 3 that they're looking at. We're going to put them in the room. We're going to hope that we come out with one when we're completed, and then we will bring that to the city, to you, and then the city to put on the April 2024 ballot. So hopefully that is coming at least to the decision making of what that funding source will be. The remainder of my report We've got our public relations. Erica Mitchell has been doing a fantastic job. We'll remind you that on October 2nd through 6th is Public Power Week, and we're thrilled to be serving the citizens of Hannibal. Human Resources, Beverly has been working overtime. We've had a few changes here and there, some folks that have left us, but we're working hard at getting good folks back in. And then our power supply. If you look at the final graph on my report, you'll see that, again, power, as we come to the summer, you'll see the cost of power start again to escalate. And we see those, what used to be 3 years ago, nice flat changes over time. We're seeing larger and larger swoops and increases in cost. That is all I have for my report. Is there any questions that you might have of me?
Any questions of Darren? Okay. Haven't heard any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I need to apologize. I skipped over an important part. Comments from the audience. Do we have anybody in the audience that would like to be heard? Okay. All right. Sorry for hopscotching around there. And Matt, if you could give us the operations report, please.
Good afternoon. My report begins on page 7 of the board packet. Again, we had a reduction in the number of electrical outages for the month, but approximately half of them were still animal related, whether it be birds or squirrels. Again, we're trying to work on identifying those areas where most of these interactions occur and taking preventative measures. Page 2 of my report, I included a graph of the total system megawatts for the previous 10 years back to 2012. Back in 2012, our peak for the year was 60.3 megawatts. We hit the peak for this year so far back in July, and we hit that peak of almost 55.4 megawatts. If you'll look, 2019, 2020 were kind of off years. We were in around 54, and now we're starting to creep back up, indicative of more load or a longer heat spell or whatnot. It'd be interesting to see how the heat that's projected for this week impacts our loading. Water, we continue to, our water produced is going up. Again, the difference between the previous 2 years and this year, we did find that discrepancy in that high surface water meter. And so it is actually reporting, with the metering we got now, reporting what is actually going out into the system. The old meter was off by about 250 gallon a minute. So when we do our filter rehab later this year or early next year, we're going to get that filter meter changed out. We did take that roof bid last month. You all approved, and we're working through the paperwork on it. Once materials are selected, the contractor will get those ordered, and that'll kind of set the schedule as we move forward, but hopefully get that completed before winter. One thing I'd like to talk about on the water distribution side is we had Fido in here doing the acoustic leak detection May to June of this year. They found approximately 31 leaks. To date, this past month we did 6 leaks repairs, and we're down to about 7 that we still have to do. Right now it's looking like the end of September they will be back in here to follow up, make sure that we got these leaks repaired, and also get access to some of the system that they didn't have access to when they did the initial survey. Call your attention to, on the wastewater treatment plant, just the flow at the plant. You look at July 2022 flow, we're at almost 3.5 million. July of this year, we're only down about 2.7. That's just indicative of no rain, low creeks, not a lot of runoff to make it to the wastewater plant. And so sewer crews constantly out doing cleaning and televising to look for any interconnection between, a storm sewer and the sanitary sewer, because that stormwater runoff is water right now we don't have to treat, but if the MS4 comes through fruition, we may have to at some point in the future, but it just adds cost. So one thing in ISC related Matthew's working on is getting our billing to where we can compare meters out in the field to actually the sales meters at individual customers' houses or businesses. Do a quick study to see, it says we put out 50 million gallons of water a month. How much are we actually selling, and what pressure zone are we selling that in? We have 4 pressure zones, the smallest one being about 35 meters. The larger ones have, 7,000 meters in it. So he's working with NISC so that we can get that water loss by zone so that we can do quick comparisons and more accurate water audit. We are down to just 2 water meters that needed changed out as far as this upgrade on our metering system. We still have 200 electric meters to do, and we're waiting to get those in. They were ordered 1.5 to 2 years ago, and the delivery date just keeps getting pushed off. So that's all I got as part of the operations report, unless anybody has any questions regarding it.
Anybody have any questions? Nope, sounds pretty tight.
I'll make you one, it always scares them when I do this. I would just like you to remember, we're being as proactive as we can versus reactive. We've got electric guys doing the infrared. We've got them doing, working on squirrel proofing it. Never going to be perfect, promise you. But we're going to work at improving that. We've done the FIDO. We've got, if you look in the report, how many SSOs we've got. We're down to 1 a month for the last couple. Again, proactive is the word. We're out there ahead of time versus just responding to emergencies.
How many of the squirrel cages are we going to have to do?
I have
A lot, I suspect.
I have a really bad.
It is the greatest cause of outage,
Yeah.
minus tree, hurricane stuff.
Yeah.
But that's kind of populated in disasters, but it is, animals are the greatest outage to the United States, or APPA.
So do we have to do one of those on each transformer?
Yes,
Residential transformer?
yes. And then there's connection points that, about equipment, stuff like that, that we have to put guarding on as well.
Okay. Take a year to do it? 2 years? Long time? Okay. Okay. Goes to the budget
So
then.
we install guarding on all new installs. And then, most of our installs now are going all underground, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, we get some reoccurring events, animal events in specific neighborhoods. Do we, I know we're tracking it, obviously,
Yeah, I
but
focus
say,
on that neighborhood.
do those.
And we try to do shoulder month work type and get it all pinpointed down. And then sometimes it's better to put an apparatus than it is to put just all squirrel protection. You start with the apparatus and you see how that affects it. And then after you go to that, then you start putting squirrel protection throughout the whole thing.
Okay, thank you.
And don't
Part of
forget,
it
we're
comes
still.
down to tree trimming as well. I mean, if you get the trees back from the lines, back from the
Yeah,
poles,
that makes
they're
sense.
not as
You can't jump it.
they don't jump it and use it as the roadway at that point.
We've still got work like they're doing on Palmyra Road, replacing poles, replacing, we've got this general O&M that we're doing, and that's kind of above and beyond, and so it will take us a bit to get everywhere, but that's what we're working at.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. And Matt, if you could update us on projects? Or did you?
Are you going to skip financials?
No, we moved you up.
Sorry, yeah.
Keep you up here.
Let me get back in here then.
Okay.
On projects, again, water plant roof, you approved it last month. We're going through getting all the contracts and everything signed, materials selected and ordered. Once those materials are selected and ordered, then we'll have a better time frame of when that will be completed. We're trying to get it done before the end of the year. Gravity filter, that's the sand media, anthracite filters. We reviewed and approved the design memo. We hope to have that bid out by the fourth quarter of this year with construction early next year. That was something that we had in last fiscal year's budget, but because we went after some ARPA money, it pushed it back and when we weren't selected to get that money. And then the other thing I want to bring your attention to is North Street's still moving forward. There were some changes with the engineering firm that was in charge of that design and construction administration. Right now, the schedule that we've got is tentatively due to be bid in late 2023, with the construction completed by the end of 2024. Because that is ARPA money funded, it has to be complete no later than the end of 2026.
Because that'll take a while. That'll be a long-term project,
It'll be
pretty difficult.
multi-month. The big time factor in that is going to be securing the pipe once the contract's awarded. It's precast concrete that are bolted together. It's kind of a specialty deal, and so it allows the construction to occur quicker, but you just have more lead time waiting for material.
All right.
That's all I got for that.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Matt. And financial next, please.
All right, I do have a request to make before we start on the financial report, actually an amendment to the agenda if I can. We need to add in a piece under unfinished business to set the rate hearing for next board meeting, which we'll get to. But for right now, I just need somebody to make a motion to amend the agenda to add that.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, financial report. So we're turning the book to a new fiscal year here in July for us. So to start fresh here, our unrestricted cash was up just slightly from the month before. We did have a reduction in restricted cash as we make all of our, or the majority of our debt service payments in June. However, I say that, and we did have one that wasn't made until the very first week in July. And so you'll see payables and accruals decrease significantly since that payment was made in July. Utility-wide, though, total assets are down just slightly from the last month and are about 5% less than a year ago. The next page is our income statement for July. Because it's our first month in the fiscal year, we only have one or two sets of income statements. We don't have any year-to-date financials to present since it's just the 1 month. So overall, utility-wide net income was about $100,000 more than what we'd budgeted. The electric fund specifically didn't have quite as much Prairie State MISO credits for the month, but purchase power costs overall were down significantly from what we had budgeted. So a good start there. A concern, though, in the electric fund is just that revenues were down about 10% from what we had budgeted. So we'll be monitoring that. Water and sewer funds both finished slightly behind budget due to lower revenues and slightly higher operating expenses. Compared to last year, though, utility-wide net income was about $347,000 less this year. The electric fund did perform much worse because of the lower revenues and the lower Prairie State credits that we received. The water and sewer funds, though, did both have better results this year than the year before. And in the electric fund, kilowatt hour sales, specifically unit sales, were down by about 11.6% this year compared to last. So basically, just to summarize all that, the electric fund basically broke even for the first month this fiscal year. So we'll be looking at that very closely, again, just to make sure that we're getting back in compliance with our debt covenant. And then the water and sewer funds had decent starts, but we do want to be aware of the drop in revenues that we've seen so far. Normal items on there, bring your attention down to the debt service coverage ratios. You'll see there, they're about halfway down on page 20 of your board packet. The electric fund is currently meeting the debt service coverage ratio for the month of July, just over 2. So that is a good sign, and we hope to see that continue. And then we've got all of our checks written for the month and our credit card statement and everything else on there. And just to conclude my financial report, obviously we wrapped up our fiscal year. So far, we've had the auditors do some interim testing where they do some planning and internal control types of testing remotely. And then they are scheduled to be on site the week of Labor Day. And so we are working very hard to get ready for them to be here and get that audit wrapped up. And so we'll look forward to that in a couple weeks, as we do every year. Any questions on the financial report?
I have a couple. I noted in there the summer hedge, and it's in conjunction with what we talked about earlier today. Was it 403,000?
That was not in conjunction with what we talked to. Well, the 403,000 was not in conjunction with what we talked about today. That is an energy hedge, which is something we've had in place for at least the last 3 fiscal years. This is the new contract with AEP. So essentially it hedges us against the volatility in energy prices that we see typically in the summer months. But also the what Kyle was talking about today is capacity. And that was also, you'll also see that in the...
It's a different hedge.
It's a different hedge.
Okay.
Yep, capacity versus...
Hedge 1, hedge 2. Gonna have to keep it straight.
Right,
Yep.
yeah.
And the other question is MISO credits. We've talked about this in the past, about creating a sinking fund or some reserve just in case as they shut down the coal operation. Any thoughts on that or any discussion about that from management?
Probably not specifically. That's really, I mean, with everything else going on, it's been relatively quiet on the federal front.
We really end up losing that about 2038. So I think there's some political things going on that we ought to plan it. What you're saying, I agree. There's the financial impact of that. So if everything were
Worst case scenario.
if
Yeah.
the worst case scenario is we didn't do anything today, we'd have to replace that entire 20 megawatt portfolio 2038, plus pay for that going forward to 2042, the end of our contract. So we would have 4 years of power that we would have to be paying for without getting the benefit of any income, anything on that. We could figure out that amount, but I will tell you, I believe there's some litigation things going on right now that
You think it's not going to happen?
I apologize, I'm holding my breath for a couple months, probably 11 months to see where things are going to head.
Yeah.
And then, because we're not the only ones in that bucket, we are not alone in this.
Well, there are at least 8 others that own that
Exactly.
coal
And
plant. So
we're kind of following their lead. We're very aware of it. MPOA is very aware of it, and I don't have a solid answer for you. How's that?
okay.
My crystal ball gets real foggy when it gets out to there.
I guess my original premise question was, what would we have to set aside in that reserve fund? You know, it's my roof leaking
Yes.
and being replaced in a simple format. What would I have to set aside to cover that just in case? It may be a number that we can't do, I suspect. But
And you're right, but that's again that argument for that robust reserve fund. You know, let's have what happens if someone came in and said that, the legislature in Illinois said that this is no longer going to be open. They could come in and with a swoop of a pen, it's gone. So what would we do for that year? I mean, for 2 years, we'd be in the hole by tens of millions.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it's just a discussion about future planning and what ifs.
and,
Okay.
and it's
We can't solve it today.
It's like I was saying, the amount of regulation, the amount of uncertainty in the electric market that used to be just solid is just starting to wide up. It's just the
And it's
change is immense. And so the biggest protection we have is that reserve fund. Thank you.
Paul, do you have any insight into why we have a 10% reduction of electric usage? I mean, it's not an accounting thing, it's more of an operation thing, I guess.
Right. I mean, weather-wise, it wasn't definitely wasn't a cold July. It seemed pretty average. I think the temperature for the month when I looked it up was less than last year, but not significantly.
And that kind of difference in usage of AC would make
Right.
that
no,
sort of difference?
No, I don't believe it would. So
We may offset it this month.
Yes.
yeah. So no, to answer your question, I don't have any specific insight on what that drop was from.
I think it's weather. I do think it's weather.
Anybody have any questions of Paul's report? Have not. Thank you very much, Paul.
Well, you're all awake, so I didn't do my job, but thanks anyway. And that new item that we added will go after my other item on unfinished business. So,
Okay.
thank you.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. Looks like Mr. Munslinger is going to talk about emergency response plan.
Yeah, you'll find in your packet on page 42, memo and the emergency response plan and the safety manual. As part of the RP3 submission that we do every 3 years, they like to have approval of boards and ultimately the city council in this case of our emergency response plan and our safety manual. So
I do have
I'm seeking approval. If you all want to read it all and provide comments,
I did
you're more
read
than welcome.
part of it. I think it's about 200 pages. but I did read the introduction on page 5 and on page 16, and I would encourage us all to look at page 5. It's a great, based on what happened in Maui, it's a good thing that we have this. The first 2 paragraphs on page 5 really explain why. But the other, and I would encourage Erica to consider doing this on page 16, getting that on our website. It basically describes what happens, key flood elevation information in town, so by the neighborhood. It really is a terrific read for the public to understand what will happen at certain stages of the river coming up. At 20 feet, 24 feet, 26 feet, things start to get pretty interesting in town. And if the public's aware of that, I think it's a good read. Just a comment, as always, from Bill.
That's on the Corps' website as well.
Is it? Yeah. You know, sometimes we have to get it in the paper. We have to kind of flag it out there. But it really is a great plan, and I'm pleased to see the detail.
So I don't know, is this something that needs approval?
It does need approval, yes.
I make a motion to approve the emergency response plan as presented.
And safety manual.
And safety manual.
Do
Correct.
we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're talking about reauthorization of a credit line. Paul, please.
All right, so quick background here. Our business park out there currently has a stream going through it, and the design plan that we've been given right now calls for a stormwater detention lake. And so if we were to put in that lake, it would destroy some of the stream habitat that's already there. And so the Army Corps of Engineers has put together some design requirements. They call them compensatory mitigation requirements that would require us to put more stream bank habitat around town as well as out at the business park, and fill any blanks that I miss out on here. But essentially this line of credit just exists if we were to ever start that work, that mitigation work, and for some reason not complete it, the Army Corps of Engineers would be able to come in and call on that line of credit to finish that work for us. It was just a requirement as part of the design plan. So we've never used funds from this line of credit, but it is out there if it was ever needed. So it does expire on September 9th, and so we are just asking for you all to approve renewing that line of credit for an additional year.
Motion to approve the extended reauthorization of the line of credit.
Second.
Any discussion? So you don't anticipate needing this until the inevitable happens, I guess.
Correct, yeah.
We do it every year.
All right, everybody in favor of that?
Aye.
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 Okay,
Okay,
what's next?
thank you. And then,
Now we're on to the added item that you were looking
Right
for.
here.
yes. So back during our budgeting process at the first of the year, you'll recall that we had a need to raise rates in both the electric and water funds. When we were looking at doing that at the beginning of October, and so our city charter would require us to set a rate hearing 15 days prior to that rate increase taking effect. And so that would put us at doing a rate hearing before the September board meeting, so September 18th. And again, just to recap, the increase in rates in electric would be approximately 9.25%. And that would be to get back in compliance with the outstanding debt covenant in that fund. And that would equate to an increase of approximately $11 a month for the average residential user who uses approximately 1,100 kWh a month. And then the increase in water would be 3% to continue with the rate track that was set by Utility Financial Solutions last fall. We have seen some stabilization in the water fund. However, our costs for our chemicals in that fund are projected to continue to climb. We've also we've put off some capital projects in that fund here over the last 3 or 4 years that need to be addressed as well. And so that does come out to an approximately $1.49 increase a month for the average residential user who uses 4,000 gallons a month. So you've got in your documents there on your electronically a copy of the redlined schedule of rates and fees that would be approved after that rate hearing next month. So you'll find that, I believe it'll be under the financial folder in Teams. And so what we just need to do tonight is to go ahead and set that rate hearing for September 18th at 4 p.m.
Okay, I make a motion that we add that public rate hearing to the agenda for September's meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Moving right along to new business. We have a guest, Maria Coons from HREDC, to give us an awesome introduction.
How are you guys?
Thank you.
I just wanted to introduce myself and kind of give you guys a year in review of HREDC. I believe most of you probably know what we do, but we are a nonprofit based here in Hannibal, covering Marion and Rawls counties that basically facilitates economic development for the counties, City of Hannibal and the City of Palmyra. We're very grateful to the Board of Public Works for being a member of our organization. Prior to taking on this role starting August 1st, I had worked at HREDC for 2 years in the Small Business Development Center. So I had plenty of time to work under my predecessor, and I'm now excited to kind of take on the helm of the work. We have a lot of really exciting things going on. This past year, we've had a lot of really good accomplishments, which I'll go over a few of them. The sheet in front of you just lays out our big buckets of things that we do. We do a lot of things, but this tries to condense it down into 3 pages. I've meant to make it a page, and here we are. But you can see on the back, our board of directors are listed, and we do have 3 directors from the Hannibal Board of Public Works, and you've heard from all 3 of them tonight. So if you have any recommendations, I will send you to them, and they can, consult with me. But first things first, so I wanted to tell a little story. Last week, one thing that we do is we respond to requests for information through the Missouri Department of Economic Development, or Missouri Partnership. And so what that looks like is those are state-level organizations that work with local economic development offices to see if there are potential sites or buildings for companies interested in locating in Missouri. So this is like the state-level channel that we go through. We do a lot of recruitment on our own at the local level, but we're putting out information about things like the Rawls County Industrial Park, the Lakeside Technology Park that Paul was talking about earlier, the Industrial Park in Palmyra. We have one in New London, and then this one last week specifically concerned the Marion Rawls Regional Port Authority site in West Quincy. And so I've spent the last 7 months starting to do these, and I'm getting better at them. But I received one this week, and unfortunately for Hannibal, it was specific to the port site in West Quincy. And so I'm busy, and I look at it, and I forward it on to our utility partners to see if we have the ability to meet the utility demands of this project. So I send it on, and then I just so happened to see Matt and Darren, and then a representative from Northeast Power, who Missouri Rural would serve the site, and say, hey, did you guys, hear about this RFQ or RFI and everything else? And the representative from Missouri Rural looked at me and said, yeah, 750 megawatt request for information project. And then I was reading your guys' packet today and realized that is over 10 times what the city of Hannibal does.
That's
in
optimistic.
volume.
Yeah.
So I was laughing a little bit at myself for not, catching that whenever I set it on. But so we do respond to things like that. In that example, that was a metal manufacturer. So they're going to need like some really high temperature electricity and things like that. So that's one way that we're promoting. Most of the RFIs I receive do not ask for 750 megawatts. I think that's like a once a year, if not less, situation. But we also work a lot with our existing employers to look at expansion projects, things like that. We do a lot with small business and entrepreneurship. Like I mentioned, we have the Small Business Development Center that we're currently seeking candidates for. So we have that position open. And then we also do some real estate and property revitalization assistance as well too. All of that, why do you all care? Well, you're citizens of Hannibal, but more importantly because, this is all about generating load for you. So we're looking to obviously not only increase the number of business, increase commercial use of utilities, but also revitalize and maybe reinvigorate certain areas of town that we're not currently seeing a lot of use from. So that's what we do. We also do have a transportation and a workforce development committee, and then we are the administrators for the Marion Rawls Regional Port Authority that purchased the property in West Quincy last year. So that is a very new initiative. Something else that's exciting for the region is through the Port Authority, because it is a public entity, we were able to apply for and receive an EPA Brownfields grant. And so what that means is we will now have funds to do around 23 phase 1s and 7 phase 2s throughout the 2 counties. So what that looks at is actually, they do an audit basically of a brownfield property. So a property that has previously been industrial, gas station, laundromat, grocery store, you name it, and has been blighted. And so those phase 1s and phase 2s come into play where they come out, they do an audit, and they see if there's any hazardous issues, any environmental issues. And then once we have those, we can see about like remediation of those things. So we'll obviously be working really closely with our public partners on figuring out what key properties do we have that would be well poised for redevelopment to eventually get them back to commercial usage. So with that, thank you for being members. We are excited. We've always loved serving you, and we love the partnership that we have with the Board of Public Works. Thank you for letting your management spend so much time at our office, especially over the past 7 months, because we have had a vacant spot, and that's been a huge help to us. And believe it or not, your intern actually spent some time with me in July, just helping me get caught up on some things. So we're always leaning on the Board of Public Works and hope that we can pay it back and continuing to grow Hannibal. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Have you heard much about the potential bypass for 61?
Yep. So we operate a transportation committee out of our office. And that committee had been part of the early discussions about what the bypass or expressway would look like. The role that I think HREDC is playing more in that is, regardless of, I think a lot of people are aware that there was money in the state budget that was vetoed to explore that bypass option. What HREDC is focused on is potentially looking at what would it look like to set up a transportation development district in these two counties to assist with projects like that once we are well informed of what the best option is. So right now, the Missouri Department of Transportation is in the middle of basically doing a rather large study to look at, what would be the best solution for that bypass, for that expressway or that bypass. And so they have, they told us last month they're doing traffic counts right now along McMaster's to see what the semi-load is basically. And they're also they keep saying late summer, but I'm like, it's going to be September, which is fall. But so this fall, they're going to have citizen advisory groups to actually hear from the citizens that are affected by the area of McMaster's, Highway 61. So know that MoDOT is spending a lot of time and effort on figuring out what the best solution is. And then in the meantime, our organization is looking at, we could wait a really long time for the state to come up with the money to potentially improve some of the transportation initiatives that we have locally. But, if we came to the table with our own transportation development district with a separate tax, that could very much change the conversation. We are very aware that there's a lot of other things going on in regards to things going on the ballot. So we're being respectful of that. And so it's a slow work in progress. But that group is full of, we have people in that group from the Department of Transportation, from the Board of Public Works, from both counties, from both cities. So it's a very interdisciplinary group that is trying to do the right thing.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
All right, thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. And Matt Unslinger, about the antenna situation.
Hopefully for the last time in this meeting.
Getting your
what
exercise, aren't you?
Yeah. What I got before you tonight is a MOU with the Department of Public Safety, Missouri Interoperability Center. It's for a lease at the water tower at the water plant. They had set up a temporary site up there approximately a year ago to make sure that they had full coverage, mainly in the downtown area. This is for the MOS1 radio system. It's a statewide radio system that allows people to get on the radio and talk clear across the state. It's something that the city just moved to about a year ago, and it connects them to the highway patrol and different agencies throughout the state. And so now that the temporary site's been in place for a little over a year, they determined it was a site for a permanent installation, and they're just asking for a 5-year MOU that would allow them to continue to use that site. It would require them to come up and pour a concrete pad, put some permanent control panels. Right now, they just have a enclosed trailer with all the equipment housed on it right now. So we don't see a problem with it, and
We don't incur any liability or.
Nope.
To do it to generator too, small generator as well.
I don't know.
We've got a generator.
And our water plant, it'd be behind our water plant generator.
Yeah, there's no reason for us to go against something like this.
Okay. Motion to approve.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
You.
Can we back up
Still
to
up?
B, just real quick there.
the capacity hedge? We've had the discussion to begin with. If you look in your packet on page 211 and 212 is the blue line, I would say red line, but it's the blue line copy of the amendments that we have to our existing policy. Would like to present that to you, have you digest it, and we'll bring it to you again next month for approval, if that's appropriate.
Sure. Makes sense. Okay, any comments from the city attorney?
Not this time.
Okay. Do we have any general discussion anybody like to bring up? Okay. If not, do I hear a motion to go into closed session?
Pursuant to section 610.021312 of the Missouri Sunshine Law, the meeting shall convene in closed session to discuss personnel and contracts, admitted board members, plus Darren and Matt and Andrew, not Ethan.
Do we need a second on that motion? Yes, please. I second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Push your red, or make it red.
Oh, sorry.